Okay guys, before we get started, I would just like to point out that this episode was requested by Jared Osborne. If you guys want to go check out his channel, he does funny little cartoon videos, music videos, parodies, and whatnot that are honestly pretty entertaining. Check out his channel, be sure to subscribe, and I think he'd really appreciate that. So without further ado, let's get started on today's Let's Talk. It's no surprise that one of my favorite films of all time is, of course, King Kong, but one of my favorite things of all time is, of course, anime. I freaking love anime, guys. In my opinion, anime has some of the most creative content, story, and characters you could possibly imagine, even better than what we see in movies or television. And personally, my top 3 favorite animes of all time are Sailor Moon, Dragon Ball Z, and Inuyasha. Anime, you guys, has been a big turning point in my life, so taking King Kong and anime and putting it together, oh my god, it would be the most amazing thing ever! Now, technically, King Kong and anime have crossed paths before with the King Kong show from the 1960s by Rankin Bass. And not to mention that King Kong did have a few manga adaptations during the 70s and 80s. There's only 2 that I actually know of. One is a manga adaptation of the 1976 film, and the other one is a straight-up manga storybook. And yeah, sure, there's been several anime fan arts of what King Kong would look like in the anime realm, but actually, come to think of it, an anime adaptation of the story of King Kong would be quite entertaining, to be honest. I mean, Godzilla is getting an anime movie, so why not the giant monster that started the genre? And given that this show comes from a what-if scenario of creativity and imagination, the question is, who would I pick to do the potential King Kong anime movie? I mean, the story itself has some great potential to be an anime film, not only in the visual style, but also in the sense of how the characters would be portrayed. Now, the first question I should point out is how I want the King Kong anime to be in terms of tone. Well, if you guys are lucky enough to see anything King Kong manga related, I would actually like to see it in that sort of style. But in terms of tone, I'd want to have a dark, epic story, but also a sense of fun, adventure, and comedy in the film. Then there's a question of producing, and I see nobody better to produce the anime film other than Toho Studios. I mean, these guys are the kaiju kings of Japan, so what the hell, give them the project. Now, in terms of the anime animation style, that's a tricky question. I mean, there are several great anime studios in Japan, one of which being Toei Studios, which have done amazing work on Dragon Ball Z, Sailor Moon, and too many animes to count. But given that Toho has also produced anime films, I think I'd give the animation curb to the guys who produced the first Inuyasha movie. And to be fair, the first Inuyasha movie is actually a great representation of the show itself. But I also appreciate it for its anime style and the way the characters look, and I'd say in that sense they would be the perfect people to do the animation for this Kong film. Then of course there's the question of the story and characters in the film. Well, in terms of the story, I would probably want to make it the same story as the original King Kong, but make it take place in the present time. But considering it's an anime Japanese production, I would want it to take place in Japan and have the characters mostly be Japanese. Which of course would mean that Kong would attack none other than Tokyo itself. Then of course we have to talk about the characters and how they would be portrayed in this adaptation. Well, I think the first person we should take a look at is the Carl Denham role. Now, we have seen the adventurous spirit, the tough-as-nails filmmaker, the big game hunter, and the greedy businessman with the Denham character in most of the adaptations. But in terms of this adaptation of the Carl Denham role, I think I would make him a lot like the Mr. Taco character in King Kong vs. Godzilla. Give him a bit more of a comic relief, but also make him an adventurer and a clever businessman. And honestly, I think it would give Denham more of a lighter tone than what we've seen in the previous incarnations. Now, given we're basing these characters on a lot of Japanese media from movies and television and anime, who would I want to see in the characteristics of Jack Driscoll? Well, you gotta remember, in most adaptations, he's kind of a tough-as-nails, rough and gruff sailor who doesn't take kindly to Anne, but eventually shines to her and eventually falls in love with her, and will go to the ends of the earth to save her from Kong. Well, the only person I think that comes close to the anime version of Jack Driscoll, it would probably be Trunks from Dragon Ball Z. Yeah, if you look at the guy, he does resemble Jack Driscoll quite a bit. I mean, given the guy carries a sword instead of a gun, but the characteristics of Trunks is something that we could potentially see with the Jack Driscoll role. Then, of of course, there's the beauty that tames the beast herself, Andero. Now, for the majority of the Kong adaptations, we have seen her very much as an out-of-work actress or a rising star to be. And while at first she is afraid of Kong, she does eventually care for him and feel sympathy for him by the end of the story. And maybe it's just me, given I've watched so many animes, but I would like to see Andero as a high school student. I mean, yeah, sure, she'd have to be in her last senior year, but given some of my favorite anime characters come from that high school background, it would be kinda cool to see Anne in this portrayal. Sort of like Kagome in the Inuyasha series, with her comedic timing and sweet attitude, but also a sense of a badass woman who could take care of herself. That would be an amazing Andero. I mean, can you imagine the arguments her and Jack could get into with that kind of character?
Did you have to make such a noisy entrance?
Pardon me? You're the one that told me to use an arrow.
I never told you to blow us up!
Then there's a question of where Skull Island will take place in and what creatures we could expect in the film. Well, given that the film would take place in Tokyo, Japan, I do imagine Skull Island being more like Faro Island, given more than it's in the South Pacific, more than southwest of Sumatra. And what kind of creatures could we expect on the island? Well, I would want to see our fair share of dinosaurs and other prehistoric creatures, but I would also want another creature on the island to compete with Kong on who is king of the island. Kind of like Gaw in the Kong King of Skull Island book. But I would make Kong's opponent very much a T-Rex, given he's the most obvious choice. Now, what about the character of Kong himself? Well, for one thing, I don't want to sway far off from the source material. And I would much rather see him as a gorilla-chimp hybrid very much similar to the original film, or more of an oversized gorilla like in the '76 and 2005 film. But like I've said before in previous Kong videos in terms of what I would want to see in the design, I would very much like to see a more ugly-looking Kong, a more scary, deformed Kong that is very unappealing to the eye. And again, I would only have sympathy for him until the very end, or at least the third act of the story. And in terms of characteristics, I'd want to go with something like a mute Jinenji. Yeah, you guys know, the other half demon from Inuyasha who fought the giant centipede worm monster to defend Kagome. That whole scene was very much out of a kaiju or Kong film, and I really think that's sort of the style and direction I would want to go in terms of the adventures of Skull Island with the anime. And in terms of the music, I would want to go more with an Akira Ifukube-like score from the Godzilla films, most notably the tone with that of Godzilla vs. Destroya. And I know there's several directors, voice actors, and English voice actors who could do a fantastic job with the characters and story, but I wanted more to focus on the tone and style of the film, rather than who I would pick for director and casting. And I have to say overall, guys, a King Kong anime would actually be a really cool and kick-ass idea. And for those watching my show in Japan, send a good word out for Toho and the anime studios down there, especially if they could get the rights to King Kong. And I'd have to say, taking two of my favorite things of all time would be a perfect sandwich of awesomeness. And that's it for this episode of Let's Talk and my overall thoughts on a possible King Kong anime movie. Agree? Disagree? Let me know in the comments section below, along with any other subjects you'd like me to cover on the show. So, until the next video, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys later. This is BigJackFilms, signing off.